Many people are leaving Christianity because of how they read the Bible. I almost did too. In this episode, I explain why I've deconstructed certain views of Scripture while becoming more convinced that God is real. As an engineer, what pulled me back wasn't blind faith. It was physical evidence, especially the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud presents a scientific anomaly consistent with Roman crucifixion and raises serious questions about the resurrection of Jesus. But here's the paradox. The Bible reflects human culture, bias, and historical context that makes God appear to be tyrannical. Yet, the God revealed in Jesus looks radically different, self-giving, suffering, and relational. Is it possible to question the Bible without abandoning God? Can faith survive uncertainty? And why would God allow ambiguity instead of overwhelming proof? We explore deconstruction of faith, the Shroud of Turin evidence, science and the resurrection, why God allows doubt, relationship versus religious control. If you're skeptical, questioning, or reconstructing your faith, this conversation is for you. People aren't leaving Christianity because they hate God. They're leaving because of how they were taught to read the Bible. And here's the strange part. I believe God is real. I believe Jesus was crucified, and I believe the resurrection happened. But I no longer read the Bible the way I used to. That sounds like a contradiction. It isn't. As an engineer, I'm wired to look for anomalies, and the Shroud of Turin is one. It's not devotional art. It's not medieval imagination. It encodes physical information that produces a three-dimensional negative image that is consistent with Roman scourging, a crown of thorns, and crucifixion. The 3D image formation process still isn't reproducible with modern technology. That doesn't automatically prove the resurrection, but after years of looking at the evidence for and against the Shroud of Turin, I have come to believe it is the actual burial cloth of Jesus. Once again, God leaves us with some uncertainty. But it makes sense to me that something as special as God showing his love for us by his death, crucifixion, and resurrection would be documented by a photograph for a generation like ours that would have the technology to understand what we are seeing. That belief brought me back to God. But then there's the Bible. Ancient wars, tribal commands, texts that have been used to justify slavery, violence, exclusion, fear. If you read it as a flat, word-for-word divine transcript, you either defend the indefensible or you walk away, and many are walking away. So here's the paradox I had to wrestle with. What if the Bible is inspired, but also written by deeply human people trying to understand God? What if it records not just revelation, but interpretation? If the Shroud is authentic, then we're looking at a God who entered history, a God who allowed himself to be tortured publicly, a God who absorbed violence instead of commanding it. That changes how you read everything else. Because suddenly, Jesus isn't just another character in the scripture. He becomes the lens. And through that lens, God doesn't look like a tyrant demanding compliance. He looks like love under execution. Why God allows uncertainty? This is a good question. Here's something that it changed my thinking. If God wanted frightened obedience, he could eliminate doubt tomorrow. He could rearrange the stars nightly to spell his name. He could remove every skeptic's uncertainty instantly. But he doesn't. Why? Because certainty creates compliance. Uncertainty creates relationships. If God overwhelmed us with proof, we might obey, but we wouldn't freely trust. Love requires space. Ambiguity isn't divine weakness. It might be relational design. Deconstructing the Bible doesn't have to mean abandoning God. It might mean recognizing cultural context, admitting human bias, refusing to weaponize ancient texts, letting Jesus be the clearest revelation of God's character. If something in Scripture looks unlike Jesus, maybe the problem isn't God. Maybe it's how humans understand him at the time. That's not disrespect. That's discernment. The God I see in the shroud is not a checklist-keeping deity. He is a God who stepped into pain, a God who did not explain suffering from a distance, but entered it. And if the resurrection happened, then death does not have the final word. That is not the story of control. That is the story of love. You can question Scripture. You can wrestle with interpretation. You can refuse simplistic answers. That doesn't mean you're losing faith. It might mean you're finally searching for the real thing. And if God truly entered history, then maybe faith isn't about defending every line of an ancient text. Maybe it's about responding to a God who chose to suffer with us. And if you're still thinking about this after this episode ends, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe and let's keep the conversation going. Drop your questions in the comments, and until next time, thanks for watching.